can. Wonderful. Hey, everyone. Thank you guys all for joining. My name is Sethi. I'm a junior at Waubonsie Valley. I hope you guys are all doing well. I know this is a stressful time for everybody, but we are so excited to have put this webinar together. It's been a while in the making. I want to give a quick shout out to Nate Sapel and our entire executive board. It's been a phenomenal process. So thank you so much. And also, now that I have the platform, shout out to all the frontline essential workers. You guys are doing an amazing job. We salute you. I just wanted to share something really quick. I recently saw an article that had a survey in it, which, paraphrased, noted that the way a majority of our generation, being young people, views the climate crisis is with the same amount of urgency as we view the COVID-19 crisis. And it got me thinking about all sorts of intersections between what's been happening and this other capital E existential threat, the climate crisis. Like, has pollution potentially contributed to the spread of the virus? Or can pollution maybe cause other public health issues? You know, as a result of lockdowns globally, fossil fuel emissions have reduced drastically. It's really interesting. And it's made me realize we need to keep talking about climate change. We can't let it escape our radar because it's just too important. So in the spirit of Earth Week, and actually the 50th anniversary of Earth Week 2, let's keep fighting. We've seen what can happen when we're all working together to combat a crisis. So I want to give a really quick overview of what exactly is going to come in this summit. Please stay tuned because at 2 p.m., we're so incredibly excited to have distinguished guests, Congresswoman Lauren Underwood, Congressman Sean Casten, Congressman Bill Foster, and environmental activist Jeff Garris with us for an incredibly insightful panel discussion. But I'm soon going to hand it off to the Climate Reality Project, an organization founded by former Vice President Al Gore, for a quick presentation by Bella Hubbard and Effi Jacobsen. They've both done a lot of activist work in the climate sphere, and they're both seniors at Evanston Township, which is an awesome perspective to have for us young people. So I would say for now, just grab a cup of coffee, get some snacks, and let's enjoy a nice conversation. Bella, Effie, take it away.
All right, I'm just gonna share my screen really quick, and we're ready to go. All right. How's it looking? Can everybody see? It's loading. Okay. Are we good? Yeah, I think we're good. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Bella Hubbard.
And I'm Effi Jacobsen, and as he said, we're seniors at Evanston Township High School and a part of the Sunrise Movement and the Climate Reality Project. And this presentation is kind of a combination of resources from both of these organizations.
We have both become super involved in climate activism within the last year, and I can say personally that I have been scared about the climate crisis my entire life, and this has been such a life-changing and empowering experience to get involved with this work and has really carried us forward together. So this is actually a picture of Effie and I and our Girl Scout troop 10 years ago, and this is relevant because 10 years from now, if we do not take immediate action, the climate crisis is looking to become irreversible. So just imagine 10 years from now, just for a second, and see where you might be. So after this presentation, these are our 3 main takeaways. We really hope that everyone has a deeper understanding of the climate crisis and its urgency. We want to make sure that we all understand that at its core, it's a justice issue, and we want to feel hopeful and motivated to act. So this is the setup of the presentation. Must we change? Can we change? Will we change? And the first part is sort of the darkest part, so bear with us. We promise things will get lighter.
So when we look up at the sky, it seems vast and limitless, but in reality, it's a very thin shell of atmosphere surrounding our planet. If you were to turn a car on its side and drive straight up, it would take less than 10 minutes to reach the edge. And into this fragile bubble, we're dumping 110 million tons of pollution every single day.
So here's a quick explanation of sort of how the greenhouse effect works. And you can see that Earth is actually the Goldilocks planet. And that's because it's not too hot, not too cold, but just right to sustain life. And that's because we have this layer of greenhouse gases that takes the sun's heat and traps some of it while letting some of it escape. But as we're thickening this layer of greenhouse gases, more and more of the sun's heat is being trapped into this atmosphere. And so we're seeing extreme heating. So here are some of the biggest contributors to these greenhouse gases. One that we're really going to be focusing on today, and kind of the biggest one, is these coal power plants. So that's where we're getting most of our energy today in the United States, by burning fossil fuels. Another huge one is industrial processes. So that's anything you're buying brand new from the store. Landfills. So every time that you are throwing your food into the landfill, it actually rots and produces methane, which is 25 times more potent than your everyday greenhouse gas. And another big one that we're just going to touch on today is agriculture. That's another huge producer of methane.
So as we're seeing this huge increase in the amount of fossil fuels that we're burning in just the last 100 years, we're seeing the exact same pattern, which is a huge spike in global temperatures, which is never been seen before.
Mm-hmm. And so today, a third of the Earth's population is seeing this deadly heat waves, right? And we know that that's only predicted to worsen within our lifetime. Unfortunately, in my lifetime, if we do not combat the climate crisis, I'm looking to see 60 days a year in Chicago where it's too hot to go outside. That's
And this warming is happening all over the planet. Antarctica was recently 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And this warming is causing glaciers and ice caps to melt, which is causing sea levels to rise, and something called tidal flooding, which is when high sea levels cause entire coastal cities to be flooded in feet of water.
So something we're recently finding out is that most of this heat that we're producing is being absorbed by our oceans. And this is extremely dangerous because it's affecting our water cycle. So as you can see here, more water is evaporated with higher temperatures, and it stays in the atmosphere for much longer. And so when it finally does rain, we see these enormous rain bombs. And this is something we would have never seen even 50 years ago. And it's also causing more frequent, more intense, and longer lasting hurricanes. And normally when a hurricane reaches land, it tends to dissipate really quickly, but now with these high temperatures, they tend to actually get worse once they reach land, which is causing extreme damage all over the world.
And these storms often mobilize pollution, like this oil spill. And we know that companies intentionally place facilities like this in low-income communities and communities of color because they don't always have the resources to prevent it. So then toxic waste like this ends up in people's backyards.
And Hurricane Maria killed more people than 9/11. These are American people, and our government had the chance to protect so many of these lives. We know that if this
Bella, I think that audio is not quite coming through right now. Maybe Effie can just continue from here.
Okay. So I'm sure that many of you haven't heard of Cyclone Idai in Mozambique, but many of you have heard of the Notre Dame fire, and that actually received billions of dollars and a ton of support, while this killed 1,000 people and nobody heard about it. And this is also affecting our agriculture, which is a huge issue. Just this spring, we're going to see extreme flooding in Illinois, which is going to affect farmers' livelihoods and prices and food accessibility. How many of you heard that Chicago recently declared a climate emergency? I don't know if you've noticed at Lake Michigan, but our lakes are way higher than we've ever seen them before. And our group is actually working with the mayor of Evanston to declare a climate emergency ourselves. And unfortunately, we could show you slide after slide. Oh, are you back, Effie?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
So yeah, we could show you slide after slide of flooding and storms affecting people all over the planet.
So something that many of us don't know is extreme cold is also caused by the climate crisis. This is because the polar vortex, which is meant to be on the North and South Pole, has literally split in two. And it's reaching the United States and Europe, and it's causing these deadly cold winters where it's way too cold for anybody to live or breathe outside. And we know, again, the same story, people who don't have access to healthcare, who don't have access to heating systems are going to be most impacted and most vulnerable. So the same water that's being evaporated by our oceans and causing those storms and hurricanes is being evaporated by our land at an even faster rate.
We know that water scarcity already affects more than 40% of the world's population, and this number is increasing quickly. Just like flooding affects agriculture, drought affects agriculture, and we know that climate change is one of the leading causes of global hunger because of issues like this.
Mm-hmm. So this farmer lost his entire farm to a drought in Syria, and that actually happened to millions of other Syrians, causing them to have to move into urban areas, which caused extreme instability and war. And so many of us don't know that the Syrian refugee crisis and what's going on in Syria right now has a whole lot to do with climate change. And we actually know that the refugee crisis that we are going to see is the largest in history from the climate crisis. The same story in Honduras and El Salvador, where people have no choice but to leave everything they know behind and move upwards because their land is completely uninhabitable. And we know that a wall is not going to fight this crisis, but that climate policy really will.
Every branch of the United States government has acknowledged that the climate crisis is the largest threat to national security.
So we know that more droughts and higher temperatures obviously means more fires. And here's just a picture of Australia. We see that the continent is literally, well, it was in January, on fire. And that's not natural. Let's just have that be clear. We're also seeing this on the West Coast in the United States. And this is really the typical American response. You can see all of these guys just playing golf, and really it's the people who have the resources to ignore this crisis are doing so. And unfortunately, a lot of us are guilty of this climate neglect, right? It's sort of become our reality. We're just used to it.
The climate crisis is a health crisis. Everything we've talked about so far can have lifelong physical and mental impacts on people affected. And just one example of this is air pollution kills 9 million people every single year. New Delhi, India recently declared a state of emergency because their air quality is no longer safe to breathe. And there are lots of statistics that show that this is also a justice issue, one being that Black children are 10 times more likely to die of asthma than white children.
So here's actually an image of Chicago, which is our area, is guilty of environmental racism. And so we can see the most environmentally burdened areas are in the South and West Side, which are predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods. And we know that this is because industries are purposely placing their coal-fired power plants, their waste transfer stations, all kinds of toxic facilities in these areas where people don't have the money or the resources to demand that they leave. And so the COVID-19 crisis and the climate crisis are really shedding a light on the deep inequities of this country. This is of Hurricane Katrina, which was a while ago, but still a huge effect of the climate crisis. And here's today, and we see that 70% of people affected by COVID-19 who have been killed, who have died of COVID-19 in Chicago were Black, when Chicago only makes up 30% of the population of Chicago. And it's that same map, as you can see, these two areas, the South and West Side, very similar maps.
And one super recent example of both of these issues is a coal plant that was recently demolished in Chicago just a few weeks ago. In Little Village, which we know is a predominantly Latinx neighborhood, a huge dust cloud was over the community for several days in the middle of a respiratory pandemic. And on a more global scale, we're seeing a huge mass extinction. We're at risk of losing up to 50% of all land-based species by the end of this century.
And the worst part of all is that Exxon has known about this crisis. Exxon and many other huge corporations like this. They've been doing research about this since the 70s and have since been paying our politicians to stay silent about this issue. So a huge part of this movement right now is to really get those politicians who are taking fossil fuel money and prioritizing that to begin to prioritize people over profit, or we will vote them out. So that was the dark part, and we just want everyone to sort of take a minute to feel their feelings and maybe write them down in the chat. Okay, so must we change? And normally we would have a huge audience of people saying, yes! But the question is, can we change? And again, the answer is yes. The climate crisis, the solutions to this crisis are already here. Greta and thousands of other scientists will tell us this. We just need the policy to implement them.
And just one example is wind power. We know that this has the capacity to meet our global energy needs 40 times over. And we are seeing a huge increase in the amount that's being used as it becomes more accessible.
An even better looking story with the solar industry. These jobs are booming. And if you're looking at a career right now, you're a young person and you're trying to decide what you want to do, just know that there's so many different paths to take and so many different aspects of this movement that you can contribute to. So here's the same spike that we're seeing. But unfortunately, still, our government is subsidizing the fossil fuels. And that's because many politicians have agreements with these huge fossil fuel corporations where they give them the money and they give them subsidies. So we really need to change this. We need subsidies in renewables to see a good, bright future.
There are also some things we can do on a more individual scale. So Project Drawdown lists solutions to the climate crisis in order of effectiveness. And you see that number 3 is reduced food waste. 40% of the food that we produce in the United States goes to waste, which, like Bella says, ends up producing methane. And number 4 is a plant-rich diet. And we're not saying you have to be vegetarian, but making little changes like that in your life can have a super big impact.
Effie, can you talk a little closer to the mic? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Bella?
I'm here. Oh, sorry. Another huge part of this is that we're going to need to be seeing a huge change and shift in our agriculture. So renewable agriculture is really the future. And shout out to Italy. Oh, this is bad. For implementing a climate curriculum for all students so that everybody's really educated on this crisis. And Indigenous people are really taking the lead in this movement as they have been for hundreds of years, especially in the Amazon we're seeing, which produces 20% of Earth's oxygen. So will we change? And this is really when it comes to you guys.
So in 2015, leaders from almost every country in the world came together and agreed that we are facing a climate crisis, and they agreed to work together to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions. And in 2016, Trump tried to take us out of this agreement, but we know that he can't do this until the day after the 2020 election, which brings us to one of our action points, which is be politically active and vote. Make sure that you're voting for people with strong climate policy in the presidential election and in every local election happening around you. So on the topic of climate politics, the Green New Deal is very relevant right now, so I'm just going to read this little explanation of it. The Green New Deal is a congressional resolution for the United States to transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources and become net zero emissions and create millions of clean, high-paying jobs in the process, while prioritizing frontline and marginalized communities in every step.
So this is Sunrise's explanation of how the Green New Deal and the Corona crisis and the climate crisis sort of all align. And I'm just going to read it out because I think it's so powerful. So right now we are in a crisis. As this pandemic sweeps our country, thousands and thousands of people are getting sick and losing their jobs. Our economy is spiraling and our government's leaders are failing to respond on the scale we need. But we've come out of crises like these before. In the 1920s, just years after the Spanish flu swept the nation, in the midst of a depression, people rallied around a vision for a better future, the New Deal. Now, as climate change bears down upon us and we face unprecedented economic and social instability, it's time to do it again. The case has never been clearer for a Green New Deal. This is a moment in history that offers us the chance to return to better rather than to normal. Let's all take advantage of this time in quarantine where we have so much time on our hands to grow this movement as much as we possibly can so that when this is all over, we can take to the streets and demand a better future from our politicians. So in 1961, Kennedy said, let's go to the moon. And just 8 years later, we made it to the moon. This is this level of mass mobilization that we need in order to make it. But we know that it's possible. We've seen huge changes like this in history so many times before. It requires every single one of us to join this movement and to do everything we possibly can. So this really just speaks to the fact that whatever negative feelings you have come out from this presentation, action is the cure. I promise you that it is so hard to go on ignoring or forgetting about the climate crisis. But when you take action, it is the most empowering and life-changing experience. And it feels so, so gratifying and good to take action.
So studies of social movements in the past have shown that every movement to mobilize 3.5% of the population has been successful in achieving the cultural and political shift that they were looking for. So that's kind of another one of our number one action points, which is being part of that mobilization, which, like she said, means being aware and being active. So this is just, we're going to show you a couple of the things that our group has done. This is a die-in at the Trump Tower from October of last year.
This was our September 20th global climate strike, which we worked super hard to organize, and over 500 kids walked out of school and were met by a ton of community members and families. It was a super powerful day.
And then this is a chalk out we did. Over 100 students went to the downtown Evanston with sidewalk chalk and wrote messages all over the sidewalks and buildings just to kind of spread awareness and
And we also were at the Chicago Women's March leading the climate justice block. Another big thing that our group took part of that was really run by Northwestern's divestment team was Northwestern Divestment Day, where students stood in front of the school demanding that Northwestern divest because Northwestern is currently invested $50 million in the fossil fuel industry. And many large institutions are also invested in fossil fuels. And we need to change that. We need to demand that people and companies are divesting. And this was our Earth Day. We made these signs and put them up all over town. It was really fun. And although we couldn't mobilize in the streets the way we had hoped to, this was still a really powerful way to grow our movement. So as a local hub, we've seen huge successes. Our group has grown from 8 to over 50 students. We've gotten our school to hire a sustainability coordinator, and we've been meeting with our mayor and pushing Evanston to declare a climate emergency. These are just a few of our successes. So these are our 4 main goals within our school, and I think that they're really great for any students who are trying to change policy in their school. So we really want a climate curriculum, a zero waste program, a transition to renewable energy, and a cultural shift where everybody really understands the gravity of this crisis and what it really means.
And then another one of the most important things to do as individuals is to be talking about the climate crisis, because people kind of tend to ignore it and not want to talk about it. But if we're not talking about it, then the press won't cover it and politicians won't prioritize it.
So it is a privilege to not be affected by the climate crisis yet, and a responsibility to act for those who are already being impacted and will shortly be impacted. Here are just a few things that we hope that you can use. These are amazing resources. I really, really recommend everyone go to Sunrise School. You learn so much, and it's just like the best way to become a part of this movement. Look this up. Just look up Sunrise School, Sunrise Movement, and join this class. And then I also recommend that everybody watch A Message from the Future with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. That's a really powerful video. And then you can follow us on Instagram, and you can follow the Sunrise Movement as well on Instagram. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Sorry for the little tweaks, but thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. That was wonderful. And real quick, looks like we have Representative Lauren Underwood locked in. I want to welcome her to this. This is going to be great as we start to transition over to our panel discussion. But real quick, while we have a couple minutes left until 2 o'clock, I want to ask a couple of the questions that were actually sent in through the RSVPs. So first of all, you guys touched on curriculum education when it comes to climate science. Do you think that teaching environmental science in this manner should be mandatory in our education process?
We think that the United States should follow the lead of Italy, which made required minimum hours of climate curriculum every year. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the format of science because it really applies to almost all subjects, but we do think that every student should receive fundamental climate education.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Next question. You guys talked about food waste and how much it contributes to climate change. Obviously, it's a very substantial contributor. Do you think that combating it can be very, very effective when it comes to the climate crisis? And is it possible?
Yeah, like we said, it's ranked number 3 on the list of most effective solutions to reverse climate change. And I think it said 40% of food in the United States goes to waste. So that's definitely a big thing that needs to change soon.
Mm-hmm.
Bella, do you want to follow up, or did she get it?
Yeah, I think she got it. I think that's like one of those individual actions where everybody can be composting and working to avoid their food waste. But as a group, I think that we really try to focus on policy, just because at the point where we are in this crisis, even if everybody changed their behavior, we would still be facing the climate crisis. So we really need like huge global scale policy change as well. Mm-hmm.
True, absolutely. Now, we know that over the course of this pandemic, there's obviously been a significant drop in transportation and overall in fossil fuel emissions. But the question is, do you think that this gives us a little bit of breathing room now to start to fight climate change, or is it just as urgent?
Speaking to that, I don't think that it gives.
Is the audio coming through for others?
Yeah, Bella, try again.
Okay.
Okay, I can take that one.
Okay.
You take it. You take
Okay.
it.
Wait, you're back now, though.
Oh, okay. So sorry. I would just say we should take advantage of this time. I don't think that the amount of reduced emissions right now are going to give us like more time to combat the climate crisis, but we should definitely, this is an opportunity that we've never seen before where we're all in our houses. So let's definitely expand this movement. But no, it's not sustainable for us to expect that this pandemic is going to like give us more time to fight the climate crisis.
Cool. Yeah. And last question, what are the best ways for young people, for high schoolers, for college students to get involved in the fight for climate action?
I would say, first of all, join Sunrise School. That's like step one. Then step two, make your own hub, because it's like really DIY, really easy. And start showing up to stuff. Like once you really get once you start realizing like there's events going on all the time. Right now, since we're all quarantined, I would really recommend joining Sunrise School and telling everybody you know to also join Sunrise School so that when this is over, we can grow our movement as much as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We're now getting over to the time when we're going to transition to our panel discussion. So I really appreciate your coming on and contributing to this summit. Yeah, thank you so much. Everyone give a round of applause at home for Bella and Effi.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.